Go to the SpartanMag.com, VCast, Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk outside of Spartan Stadium. Big news today. 22 hours ago, Michigan State was wrapping up game number 2, defeated Central Michigan 45-14. Mel Tucker told everybody 24-hour rule. What was it? Richmond, my bad. It's been a dizzying day. I only slept about an hour and a half last night trying to chase this stuff around. Paul Konyndyk, Associate Editor, SpartanMag.com, Jim Comparoni, SpartanMag.com. Give us a like to this channel, subscribe to the channel, go to SpartanMag.com, become a member. We'd love to have you become a member over at Spartan Mag as we continue to cover the Mel Tucker situation and Michigan State's coaching situation moving forward with number 8 ranked Washington coming to Spartan Stadium later this week. As everybody knows, Mel Tucker suspended without pay today by Alan Haller. Press conference took place at Spartan Stadium about 30 minutes ago as we record this. President Woodruff spoke, and they brought us up to date. It was a brief press conference, but they brought us up to date on a few things. Obviously, big bombshells. Mel Tucker has been accused of sexual harassment. You all know the story. Go to SpartanMag.com for that story if you don't already know it. We don't need to go over all of that, I don't think. But shocking developments for sure. Now, what's next for Michigan State? First of all, in terms of what went on, let's rewind a little bit because people are talking about, well, if Michigan State knew about this previously, why didn't they suspend Mel Tucker earlier? The investigation, Michigan State became aware of the complaint last December. An investigation was put together. It was completed in July, but it's my understanding that Michigan State's people, including Alan Haller, may not have known and probably didn't know. I don't want to assume anything, but they didn't know the full context of the information that the Title IX investigators uncovered until yesterday when USA Today published it because the young woman, the woman who, the claimant, she turned over 1,200 pages of that investigation to USA Today. USA Today did a really good job of the research, great job of the research and the story conducting that. And as they said today, Haller and Woodruff, in light of new information from that report, now the suspension comes down. Now you can say, well, they're trying to, critics or cynics might say they were trying to keep it quiet. I don't want to speculate, but I'm pretty sure that was not the case.
I mean, there's Title IX, has guardrails protocol in place to protect the claimant and to protect the people that are accused of accusations. There is an investigative process, and there's a hearing. Now that hearing hasn't taken place, and
so when a complaint is made, it goes through channels, and certain channels are hands off, and they can't look into it, and they can't be aware of it. Alan Haller would be among those channels that probably, I don't want to say unequivocally, I've not asked him. I can say almost assuredly he didn't know about all those things, all the specificities of them until it came out.
And the thing about Alan Haller, if you don't know, he's got a law enforcement background. He's not the type of guy that's going to take this kind of thing lightly. He's not the type of guy that's going to overstep those boundaries, and he's going to do it. He's going to do it by the book. And
that's my read too, Paul.
Yeah. So I mean, there's culpability probably and everybody involved in this, but to go out and say, well, hey, because Mel Tucker wasn't suspended without pay earlier, that this is somehow part of an Alan Haller cover-up, or say that he knew and now he's trying to cover his butt. I think that's a little bit inappropriate, and I think if you knew Alan Haller and you knew that Alan Haller's not necessarily Mel Tucker's guy.
No.
So that's the thing. I think there's assumption out there, and I don't think it's fair. Alan Haller's his own person. And Mel Tucker and Alan Haller didn't always see eye to eye. Alan Haller's not a shill for Mel Tucker, the football program. He sees himself as an advocate for the entire athletic department. And those guys butted heads in a lot of different ways. And I don't see Alan Haller, given his background in law enforcement and given his my perception of him as a person with good character, I don't see him cutting any corners in any kind of investigative process.
That's my read also, my observation. And I mean, quite frankly, we're just talking off the cuff here. When's the last time you saw Mel Tucker and Alan Haller together? They've not been sidecar for a long time. So they've been working separately and whatnot. But no, Mel Tucker or Alan Haller's not going to go out there and try to protect Mel Tucker about something like this. I can say that editorially with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, and I mean, I think elevating Harlon Barnett to interim head coach is probably a good thing. He's one of a handful of guys on that staff that I could see in that role. And then I also like the idea of bringing in Mark Dantonio as a special advisor to the interim head coach. Dantonio doesn't get a lot of credit for recruiting some of the guys on this roster, but some of the veterans on that roster are Dantonio guys. But Dantonio is a by the book high character guy, and I think he'll be good for the football program. It remains to be seen how this is all going to work out moving forward, but this is going to be a long year in terms of covering off the field stuff. But personally, if we're talking off the cuff, I do not see how Mel Tucker, there's any way that Mel Tucker recovers from this professionally by staying at Michigan State. And I don't see any way that Michigan State can maintain its standards or what they want in the football program without Mel Tucker moving on from Mel Tucker. I just don't see how that works. The optics of this is terrible. It's a terrible situation given the past at the university and what the university's gone through in the last decade, and it's not only a bad look, it's a whole bad deal all the way around.
Interim President Woodruff mentioned that, and she'll be outgoing here soon also, but she stressed that this is not the old Michigan State. That was what she was trying to convey today. And if somehow they kept Mel Tucker, people would say it is the same Michigan State. I agree with you. Extremely unlikely that that's going to happen. It's not my call. It's hard to say what's going to happen, but these are damaging allegations. According to the Title IX report published by USA Today, Mel Tucker says that it was consensual. I'm just putting that out there because that's what he said in the report, and that's what his defense is going to be. From press box level looking at it looks like Michigan State is taking steps toward Mel Tucker no longer being the head coach at some point. Harlon Barnett, interim coach right now. Mark Dantonio, that was the big news today. And very interesting. Like you said, Michigan State has players on the roster that he recruited. Alan Haller said that when he shared with the team that Mark Dantonio would be a part of it, that it was met with a lot of excitement, which doesn't surprise me. These are players that maybe sensed that wheels were coming off in some ways, and they're excited about a new coach coming in. These guys all seek to be professionals someday. It's kind of a professional NFL type of thing that's happened. Not that that's great, but Mark Dantonio comes in. He recruited and signed Noah Kim. He recruited and signed Trey Mosley. Mosley played for him for a year. Simeon Barrow, he recruited and signed. There's several others.
Cal Halliday.
So there's going to be a core there that when he walks on the field and speaks to the group, it'll resonate with some. Others, it'll take a while to get to know him and so forth. But the chances of Michigan State having a respectable football season and the season not bottoming it out like Nebraska did last year or like Arizona State did, I think Michigan State has a chance to salvage the season and get some support from Michigan State fans and move on. If there were problems like we heard about that were reported and other things, the sooner the better. Mel Tucker was always fair with me professionally, and I respect him for that. I feel bad for him as a person. Those are my comments, not Paul's necessarily, but I feel bad for him. I wish him the best. But I think Michigan State fans can get excited about Harlon Barnett putting this team together with Mark Dantonio and moving forward.
I mean, the closest example that I would think of would be like Maryland with Matt Canada a couple of years back when they were going through what they went through. That was a really tough situation that kind of tore that program apart. From my perspective on this, it's a little bit different because if some of the stuff we've been hearing about has been going on for a while, allegedly, then you've got a group of players that have been working with their coaches to put together a product on the field that's in some ways independent of their head coach or despite their head coach. And I would just say, regardless of the outcome of the Title IX investigation and the hearing, beyond the optics, the judgment of some that would take, the poor judgment that was displayed, that's something that wouldn't be excused in any one of the players in this program if something like that happened. And I feel like that for me, if I was a player, the thing that would bother me the most is when I'm being talked about every single day, hammered in professionalism, integrity, all those type of things, work ethic, and then to see the hypocrisy on the other end, that would bother me. And it also, I think this is a chance for Michigan State, with that behind them. They're still going to have to face the fallout from this, but as well as I do that these guys can get lost in the process and they can hunker down and they can kind of rally with each other. I think you'll see that on the football field this season. Then the next step after that is keeping this team together as much as they can because, with the options out there, with football being as mercenary as it is, it's really easy for a team to fall apart. There's a lot of hype out there when Colorado got rid of as many guys as they wanted to get rid of, and that's all well and good, but there's a lot of other schools that have had coaching changes, regime changes, and they've lost a lot of guys that they would have liked to have kept. So this is like kind of a multi-stage type deal for Michigan State. I think they're going to be fine in the short term with the coaching staff that they got right now. Harlon Barnett is the interim head coach, Dantonio coming in as an advisor, but the long game is going to be trying to keep everyone together and not having this thing bottom out completely.
Mm-hmm. And if I rewind a little bit back to, there's going to be criticism about, with Michigan State players in the past, when they've been accused of, sexual assault, they're suspended immediately. Should that be different for sexual harassment in this case? That's a question people are going to pose. That's a question Michigan State considered amongst themselves dating back to last December while an investigation was ongoing. Different situations, I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure how I feel about that, but that question is going to be posed.
Yeah, and I don't know, is it, is it one of those, technical, you think of, the bureaucratic type questions, how is this involved, what makes this a Title IX investigation? Because when I think of Title IX, I think of, involving student athletes on campus or someone that you work directly with in a role on campus now. So I'm not saying that this shouldn't be a Title IX thing, but I think there's a lot more there's a lot more moving parts in this type of thing than maybe seems on the surface. And as well as I do in our culture, it's we're so quick to put people on a pedestal. We're so quick to knock them down. Everyone wants black and white answers. It's either 100% this way or 100% that way, and there is some gray area. So I'm not sure. What the answers are. We'll find out, I think, over the course of the next next several months about if there was a situation where someone should have done something more than they did, or someone didn't do enough to remedy the situation. But right now, I think it's careless to make point fingers and make accusations without full benefit of knowledge.
Because when you get into absolutes, right. Anytime someone's accused, automatic suspension, you can't do that. I mean, right. the situation here is factual, and he's admitted that this happened. Michigan State may not have known that in the spring and summer and December when it was registered, but if you start suspending people as soon as someone's accused of something, you can't really be that holistic about it, every single time. I understand that part of it too.
That to me, the admission, whether, that word consensual, I know he used that, and he said in his statement that he was hurt by, affected or whatever, hurt or affected. But the idea that, the admission of that to me makes him, unfit to be a football coach at this university.
And that might have been the first that Alan Haller heard about that, because like we said, with proper protocol, you have to pass it on up the channels. Like when Dantonio had situations going on over here, as soon as he heard about that situation with Donnie Corley and those guys, he had to put it off to Title IX. He couldn't even call their parents. He had to go hands off. So Alan Haller had to go hands off onto the proper channels. He may not have known until it came out yesterday. So at that point, it was no longer just an accusation. Mel Tucker, in those papers, admitted that something happened. Right. He thinks it's consensual, but when that happens, that's a game changer for the administration. Possibly.
The other thing too is the school can hire an outside investigator, which they did, but that doesn't mean that Mel Tucker and his attorney are going to be forthcoming with that outside investigator. So, and it's not like Mel Tucker and his attorney are going to be talking directly to Alan Haller. It's like there's those personal protections. So
they can't.
So yeah, absolutely. So I think that I'm not an attorney, but to think that because Mel Tucker works for this institution and because his attorney represents Mel Tucker, to think that would somehow put Alan Haller in the loop, is kind of it's a stretch in my opinion.
All right. As far as football goes, don't want to be insensitive to all the other situations, but we are sports reporters, and we got a Michigan State football audience. In terms of Michigan State's football team, and something I wrote about this morning. Obviously, when you have a coaching change in September, when we've seen it around in the last couple of years in this era of the transfer portal, you are in danger, if that's the right word, of having dozens and dozens of players leaving. Last year, Nebraska fired their head coach in September. They lost 42 players to the portal. Arizona State lost theirs in September. They lost 23. Michigan State's got a good roster. The last two recruiting classes were pretty good. We're starting to see that right now. And a lot of them are from Florida and Georgia, and there's going to be programs coming after them. It's no secret. Jaron Glover, Malik Spencer, Zion Young,
Dylan Tatum.
Yeah, there's going to be some players are going to be. They're going to come after those guys like Piranha. So they will lose some players. as I look at Michigan State, if Michigan State wants to avoid bottoming out in a sort of pseudo death penalty situation, which is possible, you got to try to re-recruit your own players, whether it's Harlon Barnett. If they hire a new head coach from outside, that'll be difficult. If somehow they transition this into something else in the future, they can get creative with it. I don't know, but in terms of maintaining this roster and re-upping the recruiting process, they've got a lot of players on the roster right now, and really, as it was, not a lot of room for recruits. If players leave, they'll have room for a bigger recruiting class. Moving forward, as a football program, there's a chance that they can keep the train on the tracks, Paul.
I mean, the big thing to me is the guys that you've got on the scout team right now, the guys that you don't want them to hit the portal before week 4. I think of like a Jonathan Kim last year at North Carolina. He went into the portal week 4, because he wanted to maintain his eligibility. Now, that's different with some of the younger guys because I don't think they think in those terms. They don't think in terms of I'm going to be at a place for 4 years.
That's a great point, Paul, like Connor Hayward.
But, you think of those kind of guys, like I don't know, maybe guys that we're not quite even thinking of, like a Davion Prim or someone like that, someone that you're thinking, well, maybe he's not a good fit. But we saw like when Dantonio took over and what he was able to get out of guys that maybe we thought weren't super good players. I think of like guys like Jonathan Mish or an Adam Decker or those type of dudes. It's tough when those kind of guys are leaving mid season. So I think right now the guys that you're talking about, Jerron Glover, I think they're going to play the season out. They're going to go through the season and they're going to probably put up big numbers, and they're going to do some big things. Zion Young, another guy. You think of those type of dudes. I think they're the linebacker, Jordan Hall. Those guys are going to play out the season because they're in really big situations for Michigan State. They're going to play a lot of football. The danger in the immediate thing is young guys on the scout team leaving for the portal before game 4 or whatever. And then long term, it's like what you were talking about, keeping those guys after the season. There's a transition, and it's going to, frankly, for Michigan State to make it work, it's going to take leadership at the player level. They're going to have to get with other players, and it's going to have to take a lot of communication. There's, the interim staff is going to have to talk about this is the plan that we have moving forward. They've got to be very communicative. They've got to be open and honest, and they've got to, like you said, re-recruit the team. But there's a multi-level threat that the portal presents in a situation like this. And on the flip side, if that does happen, the portal giveth and it taketh away. So maybe it's not going to quite be like a scenario like Mark Dantonio faced when he had multiple walk-ons playing and starting roles. So it's going to be a nuanced, difficult situation for Michigan State to keep this thing on the tracks. This season they're okay, I think, but it's going to take some nifty maneuvering to keep this thing together, and it's going to take some communication by the athletic administration. Haller's going to have to get involved, I believe, in helping with the recruit, or whomever is in make decision making. They're going to have to get with the team. They're going to have to sell the vision for the future, and it's not going to be easy because football is a lot more mercenary than it used to be. And without the transfer penalties that existed several years ago, there's no reason why someone should take a risk on you unless you can sell your vision for the future.
Sure. And there's no use talking about potential coaching candidates. Maybe, as that day draws nearer, maybe we will, but some of that will depend on how successful things are for the remainder of this season. I think that will factor into it. I thought it was interesting that Alan Haller was talking about, when he thought about Mark Dantonio coming in as a special assistant. And Alan Haller was very measured with that response. He says, I'm always thinking, I've always have contingency plans, and I can't tell you if it was today or yesterday or a week ago. I thought that was revealing. I've heard some other things that this has been in the back of his mind for a few weeks. In other words, he may not have known the specifics about the case, but he was not, blindsided by this, about having to have a contingency plan in place. He must have thought, I'm speaking for him, but what I was getting out of this is he thought, okay, if crap hits the fan with these things I'm hearing about, I need A, B, and C. And at some point, a long time ago, he was thinking Dantonio is out there. and Barnett's a Dantonio guy also. He says he didn't speak to Dantonio about it specifically until today, and Dantonio was excited. I have a feeling it might not have been the first time it was brought up to Dantonio. That if something happens, we'll never know. But Dantonio sounded like today didn't need 5 minutes to consider it. He was in. He said, anything you need me to do. So I suspect Dantonio can keep a secret better than anybody. And Haller can too. Wouldn't shock me if that was discussed.
And we've seen Coach D. We've seen Coach D around this program a whole lot more in the last year. Whether it's at practice or on the sidelines. But he's a guy that
they know who he is.
But I think of when I think of Coach Dantonio, I remember the first press conference. Some of the stuff he said, no one's bigger than the program, and he's just a caretaker, or like a steward of the program, and he's using very biblical, language, like the Good Shepherd type kind of analogies. And this is an opportunity for Dantonio to be a steward of the program again, and he's a Spartan. And he's gonna put everything he's got into it, and he's gonna let those coaches coach, but he's gonna give them information that they need to get on situations that maybe only head coaches have experienced, because there's a lot of stuff that goes on, and it'll be interesting. It'll be good to see Coach D around the building, and it'll be good that there's a steady hand at the tiller.
And I wonder how Harlon Barnett's going to handle it. Harlon Barnett's a very humble person. He may be more comfortable, hey, Coach, I want you to handle this. I'm going to be coordinator. The special assistant, we don't know what that means yet.
Yeah, Harlon Barnett is another guy that's going to do what he thinks is best for the program.
Uh-huh.
And that's, I think, you look at those two guys, and the other guy we were talking about late last night, early this morning, was, like a Courtney Hawkins. That's another Michigan State guy. And, I think when you have these people that are in interim roles, you want people that are going to put the program ahead of themselves. And when I think of, Harlon Barnett, and I think of, and I think of Coach Dantonio, those are two guys that fit that stewardship model.
And so is Hawkins.
Exactly.
I mean, talk about a guy that was AD and head coach at Beecher, and how much he cared about that community, and how much they love him there. And he's a hardtail guy, man. He's like a Marine, and his heart's in the right place.
And there's a lot of guys like that. There's a lot of guys like that on that staff. If you go down the list, I mean, I think like Coach Cap is like that too.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, football's bigger than just football for those guys. It's a way of life, and it's a way of teaching and imparting knowledge to young men. And so we'll see what happens. But in the short term, I think Michigan State. I think the moves that were made are I can find no fault with those right now. We can debate all we want about when a suspension should have come down, if it should have come down earlier or not, and it's probably a fruitless debate in my opinion with lack of information.
Right.
But for right now, I think Michigan State is where they need to be, and I like the way Alan Haller thinks. I know he's not a guy that's kind of reactionary. A lot of what he does is long game stuff, and I know there's been a lot of criticism out there. About Alan Haller, and there's people in the background that have been pushing I think negative views of him, and I think maybe sometimes I'm not going to get into all of that. But Alan Haller is an intelligent man. He's someone that deeply cares about this university, and he's someone that I'll give him this. He puts a lot of effort into research when he makes a coaching decision. He puts a lot of effort into why that person's a good fit for Michigan State, and he's done a pretty nice job with a lot of coaching decisions, including the hockey coach. I think he's done, and some of the soccer coach, the women's soccer coach, both really good hires for Michigan State, really well thought out. Hearing good things about women's basketball coach as well, and so I have a lot of respect for Alan Haller, and I think some of the chatter out there about him not being able to do the job, I think that's wrong. I think he's, I'll tell you, he's much more prepared to do this job than his predecessor, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. That's a guy that wasn't ready to do the job. And
Alan Haller has a lot of work to do still with fundraising for the football facility over there. That's still ongoing as well. So he has a lot on his plate. I just wonder if there's some relief for him with this, the way it's come down. People that are task oriented get on things and and they're eager to do it. As far as the Mark Dantonio thing, it's really interesting in the college football world that he's back. And we don't know to what extent, like I said a moment ago, how hands-on he's going to be. Is he going to be macro at the beginning and ease in more? It's going to be fascinating to watch. But I'm reminded of that scene in Pulp Fiction when they're bringing the wolf. If he shows up in a tuxedo, I don't know.
The fact that he's going to show up in a headset tells me that it's more than just it. In terms, there is an optic thing with Mark Dantonio on the sideline, but the fact that he's going to be wearing a headset on game day, that says to me that he's going to be more involved than just a grandfatherly Santa Claus type figure. And
and Barnett wanted him, that.
Right.
And Haller thought it was a good day, obviously.
And
I suspect they might have asked Izzo his opinion.
Yeah, and then
I know
also
Izzo's been talking with some people today around campus, some wheels to let them know things are happening and just to make sure that they knew what was going on. I heard Izzo was utilized as well on some things.
Salgado's another guy that's got a good relationship with Dantonio, having been involved with him and his coaching staff when he was at Princeton. So
they're bringing in the Wolf. And it's going to be interesting. Big game this week. Great Washington team coming to town. And a group of Michigan State football players that I think are eager to get on the practice field and get to work.
Yeah, I know I would be. Instead of having, you and I both got a zillion text messages, right, from a zillion different people that we haven't heard from in years. Everyone's got their own opinion on something like this. When you get bombarded with that kind of stuff, and the football players have gotten it too, social media and whatnot, what you want to do is hunker down and do something besides focus on what people are asking you and that type of thing. They want to focus on the process. And on the flip side, I said this last night, that the risk for a team like Washington, they kind of dominated Michigan State despite the final score last year. They see Michigan State as weakened with a lot of personnel that they had last year not being here. They're going to see Michigan State as further weakened coming in here with the controversy, because they're going to think about what would that happen if that happened to us. They're going to think Michigan State's in disarray, and there's a real danger if you're that Washington staff is for those guys to have a serious letdown. And I think of all the times that I've seen football games where a star player goes down, or basketball games. I think of the Ohio State-Michigan State basketball game last year in the Big Ten tournament, where everyone's like, well, their number one scorer, he's not playing. Then you see someone relax. It's it's not a conscience thing. It's a subconscious human nature thing, and it happens over and over again. And we've seen a lot of times, even during the Antonio era, when I think of a Minnesota team they might have lost to once, where they lost their quarterback, or an Indiana team where they lost their quarterback, and then it's all of a sudden closer than you think because there's a psychological let-up there. I think if anything, the Michigan State players are going to band together, and I think you're going to see Michigan State's best effort, a la what we saw from Maryland that year when Canada was the interim head coach. Those guys, they didn't win all their games, but they came ready to fight and every single week, and they never stopped fighting.
And this team has more talent than that team, and more talent than Arizona State had last year, more talent than Nebraska had last year. It sounds like there's going to be no press conference tomorrow, being Monday. Might not be one on Tuesday either, because Harlon Barnett and Mark Dantonio are getting to work.
Right.
So they got work to do. No press conference, it sounds like, but we'll have coverage as it comes. Anything else?
It's going to be logistical stuff tomorrow, for those guys. I'm sure they're still going to practice in the morning. That'll be different than what Dantonio did. So it's going to be getting everything up to speed.
It's going to be interesting, fascinating, never a dull moment at Michigan State. But as always, Michigan State always has the potential and the power to rise up and surprise some people and get a lot of momentum going. Like I said, there's a chance they can keep this thing on the track, not only for this year, but in the years ahead as a succession takes place of some sort. It'll be fascinating to watch it move forward. Anything else, Paul? For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni, publisher, SpartanMag.com, with the Spartans from East Lansing for SpartanMag.com.